We all know that the meraglim did everything in their power to dissuade and even scare the Jewish people from going into Israel. But there's a layer to their argument that most of us don't even notice happened. In Heintige Seder, our parasha describes the sin of the meraglim. The Lashon Hara that they spoke about in Eretz Yisrael. One of the things that they said as part of their slander of Israel is given. There we saw the Nephilim, Bnei Anok, the descendants of giants, Min HaNephilim, from the Nephilim. We perceived ourselves as grasshoppers, and so we were in their eyes as well. Rashi extracts just one word out of that pasuk, the word Nephilim. As before, she explains, Anokim. Nephilim actually means giants, and which giants? They come from the children of these two characters, Sham Chazoy v'Azoil, who literally fell from the heavens at the time of the generation of Enosh. What's Rashi trying to explain? Let him Mefarshim. So the Mefarshim tell us, that Rashi is looking at the fact in the same pasuk you have the word Nephilim twice. HaNephilim, min HaNephilim. Rashi Masbir, so Rashi has to explain what it means. That the two occasions that the word Nephilim is used in the parasha actually have two different meanings. The one is the first time that we see the word Nephilim, it just means giants. Virashi Taishin Pashas Bereshis and Nephilim, but L'shein Ivris, L'shein Anokim, who, as Rashi already pointed out, when we first encountered the word Nephilim in Pashas Bereshis, that it actually means giants. So that's normal. On the zweite Mal, Bnei Anok min HaNephilim, but the second time when the pasuk doesn't just say Nephilim, but says they came from Nephilim, there he has to give us context. There, the word Nephilim actually means to fall. As in, they fell from the heaven. And the Pshat and Pasuk is, and what the Pasuk means is, as having gesehen die Anokim, was haben gestammt, that they, the meraglim, saw in Israel those giants that came from not just ordinary giants, but great beings who fell out of the heavens, Sham Chazoy and Azoil, these so-called disgraced angels. So that's how the Mefarshim explain it, that Rashi is addressing the double language. But, we need to understand, we're going to come back to other issues with this particular explanation, but first and foremost, just a simple explanation, a simple question. Rashi is there to explain the simple meaning of the pasuk. In the simple meaning of the pasuk, why do we have to know Tzuvisin? Why do we have to know the names of these malachim that fell out of heaven? Even if it's relevant to know that they were malachim that fell out of heaven and spawned these giants, what's the difference what their names are? And number two, in Beis, why do we have to know when it was? In the time of Enosh. Just say that they were the descendants of giants who were the descendants of angels who fell out of heaven. And what makes it even stranger is, it's even more surprising, because the very first time we encounter Nephilim, which is Parashas Bereshis, where we're told there were Nephilim in the land, there, first time we encounter them, Rashi doesn't feel the need to tell us their names. It's Tomorrow, that's strange. But the very first time we're told the story of Nephilim, Rashi did not feel it necessary to tell us who these Nephilim were, even though it's the first time we encounter them. But yet, Dafka Parasha saying this specifically in our Parasha, where the whole concept of Nephilim is really just a sidebar to the bigger story, which is the Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael. That Rashi doesn't visit their name, and now Rashi has to tell us their names. Why is it more relevant here than it was in the original story? Besides that, we need to understand those names are not so straightforward either. In Chazal, we see two opinions about what the names were. That's how they described in the Gemara in Yuma, and as they bring Midrashim as well as various Midrashim. It's the Targum Yonason that gives the names that Rashi is using over here. And there's also a reference in Masechta Nida that Sichon came from this Sham Chazoy. And there Rashi adds also the word Hazoil. And Azai brings Sichon Nocherte and various other places. So the two versions, is it Uzzah and Azoel, or Sham Chazai and Uzziel? So why is it, or Uziel, why is it that Rashi over here is choosing the names Sham Chazai v'Azoil? Okay, Besides that, besides the fact that Rashi seems to give us unnecessary information by telling us the names of who the Nephilim were, even from one Rashi in Bereshis to the other Rashi, here there seems to be a difference in terms of how Rashi is explaining the word Nephilim. But Rashi here, Rashi says that they fell out of heaven. Whereas the original pasuk in Bereshis, where we're introduced to the Nephilim who were in the land, Rashi there says something else. They fell, doesn't say from heaven, and they brought the world to a state of being fallen or being destroyed. In other words, what the taich from Noflu Bepashtis is, the simplest way to explain that they fell means, as is never give that they were lost from the world. As Rashi straight away says, and they caused the world to fall or to be lost. Why is Rashi changing it here and saying they fell out of heaven, which doesn't necessarily seem to be necessary? Just say they fell from greatness, or they fell into oblivion. So the Meforshim will try to explain as Rashi dot is nothing min ha'olam, that what Rashi there is explaining that they fell from the world means that they fell out of the world in which they originally found themselves, which was a higher world, in other words in Shemayim. And that would of course be the same as he's explaining over here in our parasha, that they fell out of the heavens. But that's really difficult to try and squeeze into Rashi's explanation. Says because you don't see anything in Rashi's language that implies that they fell out of heaven. Especially when you consider that in Parashas Bereshis he puts both that they fell and they caused the world to fall in the same breath. That doesn't sound like they caused the world to fall out of heaven. That's really a stretch. So it's really strange. Why is Rashi taking a different approach over here to what he did when he originally introduced the Nephilim to us in Parashas Bereshis? There he said they fell from greatness or they fell into oblivion, and here specifically min hashamayim. Even according to what Rashi originally said, that they fell and they caused the world to fall. Remember, the intention over here of the spies is to scare the Jewish people. So if they say, these are the Nephilim who previously fell, or these are the descendants of those Nephilim, and fell means they fell from greatness, that would still scare the Jewish people. Why? Especially when you go back to what Rashi said there, because the pasuk continues, Anshe Shem, they are people who brought devastation to the world. So the spies want to scare the Jewish people. They're going to say, who's in Eretz Yisrael? The people who bring devastation to the world. Good enough? You don't have to say they fell out of heaven. Nochmer. The Shilin Pirish Rashi for Nephilim macht Shilin nit nur in einem Nephilosem. Now, the difference between how Rashi is explaining things here compared to Bereshis is not just a difference in terms of the technicality of how or where they fell. Either they disappeared into oblivion or they fell out of the heaven. But it's a completely different conversation of who Nephilim are, depending where they fell from. If you take Rashi's explanation in Bereshis at face value, the Nephilim were humans, albeit giant humans. Nobody there mentions anything about heaven or angels. They're humans who do terrible things that brought devastation to themselves and the world. And we see a similar thing earlier on where Rashi describes those same people, B'nei Ho'elikim, the children of, not Elikim as in gods, nit malachim or even angels, not B'nei Asonim v'Ashoftim, but rather Elikim means that they were the children of the leadership at the time. So in Parashas Bereshis, the Nephilim sound like prominent humans. In our parasha, they are no longer, according to Rashi, human. They fell out of Shemaim. Who falls out of Shemaim if they're human? Therefore they must have been malachim. It's really surprising that now Rashi should give us a whole new perspective on what Nephilim are, when previously he already explained what Nephilim are as humans. Schleim dem Biren dem Allem, so to explain this, all the Shaila and Pasuk was Rashi kommt verändern, unlike what the Meforshim originally said, that what Rashi is looking to address is the double language or double use of the word Nephilim in the Pasuk. Actually, the question that Rashi is asking is Neit Azayda Kefil in Pasuk and Nephilim, Mina Nephilim, not so much the fact that the Torah used the same words twice. Von Reishis Kol is the Kefil Lashon Nephilim Kishlatzmai Nikin Grace Chidush, because if the Torah repeats the same language twice in a Pasuk, that's not an earth-shattering shift from normal pasuk behavior. It's quite common, actually, that the Torah will sometimes repeat an expression to highlight or emphasize something. Like when we refer to somebody as a tzaddik, the child of a tzaddik, we're saying, wow, look how righteous this person is. That's highlighting how righteous the person is because he comes from a lineage of righteousness. Same thing here. If Nephilim means the giants, and they mean Nephilim, they come from giants, that's highlighting that this is a lineage of giants. These are really powerful, great people. And that would suit the agenda of the Malachim to scare the Jewish people. You know who they are? Not just Nephilim, but they come from a line of Nephilim. And therefore there's really no pressure to say that the two Nephilim in the Pasuk have different meanings, and even diverse meanings. So that's not Rashi's big concern with this Pasuk. And even if it was, let's assume that Rashi was concerned about the double language Nephilim. He would have told us. Rashi should have, as his headline, should have said Nephilim, ... min ha-Nephilim. Because then he'd be alerting us to see the expression is used twice, and that's what I want to address. But he doesn't do that. So what is the question Rashi is looking to address? Not the Shaila from Rashi is. Rashi's concern with the Pasuk is, in der Friedeke Psukim wird erzählt, wie die Meraglim haben mit Teil gewähnt, die Starkheit von die Yoshvei ha'aretz. The theme of what the Meraglim have done, and not long before this is, they have described how frightening it is to deal with these strong inhabitants of the land. Efes ki oz ha'am gomer. Look, there are strong people. Ve'ha'arim gomer. They're in fortified cities. Ve'gam yelidei ha'anak re'ina sham. And there they said, we saw giants. The Shaila, the question then is, you already told me you saw giants. Now, when the Torah tells us that they were, so to speak, increasing the slander against the land, what were they adding? What are they adding? They already told us they saw giants. Now you're telling us again you saw giants. The only difference is you're calling the giants by a different name. Nephilim. That's what's bothering Rashi. Is Hashem Meforish, therefore Rashi explains. As Nephilim meant, previously we were talking about regular giants. Now we're talking about the giants that came from fallen angels. Which means the meraglim actually were now adding another dimension to their terrible story about Israel. They're now saying there's another species in that land that's not even the giants we already told you about. The ones we already told you about, those are the ones already recorded in Bereshis. They are Nephilim, giants, Ba'aretz, who are part of the human population. Das heißt Menschen, was die Afchode Zere ist nur das, was ist ein Groß und euch in Wuchs. So that's a description of people who are frightening. Why? Because they're very big and very tall. The reason, they're giants. But now the meraglim say, besides those giants who are so frightening, they are Nephilim. And these Nephilim, they have the power of Shamayim. They are from angels who fell out of the heavens. This is even more scary than you thought. It also explains why the meraglim brought up this issue of these descendants of fallen angels now, when they were bringing out the slander against the land. What's the context? Because something changed between what they originally described, fortified cities, strong people, big giants. Then something changed, And now they have to bring out the big guns and say, and there are descendants of fallen angels. What happened in between? The Torah erzählt, als wenn die meraglim haben feyendig sehr red wegen der Starkheit von der Yoshvi ha'aretz. So the Torah tells us, after the meraglim gave their whole scary report back about the powerful people living in Israel, is nach dem given the vayas Kalev esam gomer. Kalev got up and he quieted everybody down, and he said, "What are you so concerned about?" And he said, "We'll go up, we'll conquer it, we are capable." Aber Rashi explains, as Kalev od mashti given up geschlagen die Tanis meraglim. As ha'om gomer, Rashi explains that Kalev dismantled the arguments that the meraglim made about how powerful the inhabitants were. How so? Kalev said, look, Moshe Rabbeinu has already shown us incredible miracles. Completely beyond the laws of nature. He split the sea. And he provided the man every single day, including today. And he brought the quail. And therefore, as Rashi says, we can go up, even if we have to go to heaven to fight for Israel. And if Moshe Rabbeinu told us to make ladders to climb up into the heaven, we will succeed in everything that Moshe asks of us. Now the meraglim have been deflated. So they need to come back with a stronger argument. If them, the meraglim get the infant, the meraglim said, whoa, hang on a second, you can't go up there. These people are so strong, they're even stronger. Mimenu, what does mimenu mean? Mimenu doesn't mean stronger than us, it means kvayochel, stronger than Hashem. Warum mimenu meint nur die Eden, ist es ein ganz Nickname für them, was Kalev hat aufgewiesen. If when they said they are stronger than us, Kalev's argument still stands. The Egyptians were also stronger than us and we took care of them. As the Eibusher can machen Nisi himself in Eden, because the Eibusher can make miracles to help us against whatever enemy it might be. Therefore, Muslim became a forest sign. Therefore, Rashi has to explain like the Gemara does, as them mithom zegemei klape meile, that who were they saying cannot beat those people in Israel? The Eibusher. But obviously the meraglim couldn't just say that they're stronger than Hashem, because that's not going to fly. Because how can any Jew believe, imagine for 1 minute, after having witnessed all the miracles? How could they think the meraglim they're onto something? Yeah, you know what? Stronger than the Eibusher. We've seen what the Eibusher could do. Therefore, the meraglim had to include new information. Now they're bringing out new slander against Israel. Some kind of a justification of the possibility of a being that could challenge God himself. So they say, what did we see there? We also saw Nephilim. They're not saying, and these Nephilim are very strong because they're very powerful, they're giants. Because if you're talking about fighting against the Eibusher, how tall a giant you are makes no difference. Now, take a rather, they were saying, no, these beings, they have a power which the word Nephilim will tell you about that is more than just physical power. They're Nephilim. They're the descendants of Malachim who fell out of heaven. They're not just giants. These are beings who are from Shamayim. We've never had an enemy like that before. And who knows, maybe they have the power to rebel against Hashem because they're from Shamayim. The Eibusher has only shown Nisim here on earth. We don't know what's going to happen when it's up against spiritual entities, giants like the Nephilim. That is what Rashi is looking to address. How they came back with a new argument because their original argument had been completely dismantled by Kalev. Now, by being Chumash Lemikri is just up a fortnight glatik. The 5-year-old learning Chumash over here, it's not going to really get the message over here. Doesn't work for him. Why? Aleph, as a malach is omer, it's back with the Baruch Hu. Child thinks, what are you telling me? You're telling me that a malach is going to rebel against Hashem? Beis, as a malach afil soll kennen haben, if Zakher durchzufinden, so gegen dem Eibusher. And let's assume, for whatever reason, that a malach chose to rebel against Hashem. Does he have the capacity to do so? Can he actually do anything with that rebellion? Therefore, Rashi says, hang on a second, you know when these people have been around, or these beings have been around from? They're Enosh. That's going to answer these two questions. because something happened at the time of Der Enosh, something happened since the time of Der Enosh, both that show us, whoa, we're dealing with something mega over here. What happened? Aleph. Wegen Der Enosh, sagt der Pasuk as Oz huchal likrei b'shem Hashem. Der Enosh is the time that humans began to degrade Hashem's name. Rashi explains what that means. They started to name people after gods, and they started to serve idols, as the Rambam tells us in tremendous detail. That tells you it wasn't just accidental that Malachim fell out of heaven at that time. It was a result of an energy of rebellion. So you want to know if a Malach could rebel against Hashem? Seems like it. Seems like when the humans are rebelling against Hashem, it has an impact on the Malachim. The Malachim also fall out of heaven. Not only that, when you think, when did these Nephilim get here to earth? All the way back in Der Enosh, you know what that means? That means they were not wiped out through the Mabel. That means despite the fact that where did the waters of the flood come from? Shamayim. Geshem in Shamayim is rain. And roischin, boiling water. Und vayimach es kol hayukum, which completely erased everything that existed on earth. But it didn't wipe out the Nephilim's descendants. Und das war ist das starke, that tells you know how strong they are. Also viel an einer Shamayim, hat der Eibishter gewollt, das soll auf sich kein Schlitten nicht haben. Der Eibishter chose that his own power is powerless against them. His own punishment doesn't affect them. This is the message of the meraglim. We're not making this up. These people survived the Mabul. Now you think that the Eibishter is going to wipe them out now? Who's to say? They're not Mitzrim. Wird man euch verstehen, was Rashi bringt die Namen von den Nephilim, Shem Chazoi v'Azol, which also explains why Rashi had to tell us the names of these Malachim. Because their names illustrate their power to potentially create a rebellion against Hashem. Back in Parshas Bereshis, first time we encounter the Nephilim, they're called people of names. What does that mean? Rashi is derived from Farish. Rashi explains. They were identified by specific names. They had names that implied the fact that they were lost, that they were wiped out. In other words, already back in Bereshis, Rashi was telling us the names of these Nephilim tell us the core and essence of who they are. Those Nephilim back in Bereshis, their name illustrated their distraction. But here, the names represent their power. Those names tell us who they are, what these angels are made out of. And Rashi doesn't even have to explain it because it is self-evident in their names. Sham Chazoi, what does that mean? It's made out of two words. Sham or Shem Chazoi, but we're going to say Sham. Sham Chazoi. Das heißt, as when man cooked Chazoi, Eifem, Chazoi means look. So when you look at this being, Zet means Shemama. You see distraction. Shem is from the Shem Shemama, and Rashi Taish before Shabbos. Anshe Hashem, Rashi already told us that. Back in Bereshis, Anshe Hashem meant Anshe Shimamoin Sheshamamu Esa'olam. People or beings of destruction because they destroyed the world. Sham Chazoi, you look at this being, you see destruction. It's pretty scary. Und der Name Azoil is Neusef, was the Name K'moishe Vaisef, the Starken von der Malach Azoil L'Shein Az. The name Azoil, you see it straight away. It has the name Oz, strength in it. Der Monte Eiche von Shem Azoil, was Azozel, was man schon gelernt in Parshas Achrei. But Azoil reminds you, the minute you see that word, you could misread it almost. And it reminds you of Azozel, who we already learned about in Parshas Achrei Mois. Was Asher Fatayshas Har Oz V'Koshe Tzuk Govoya. Rashi explained, what's Azozel? A strong, harsh cliff, which is very high and steep. This is not just regular strength. This is a very dangerous place, a place of devastation, because it's so harsh, it's so powerful. Die Namen von die zwei Malachen weisen als in Yonim is Ois und zu bringen Shmama v'choben olim ha'shachas haaretz. So you hear the names of these angels, and you know their entire purpose is power and destruction. Which goes against the covenant that the Eibishter made with Noach, and the Eibishter's rotten about the world. The Eibishter wants the world to be inhabited and settled and successful, and they want the exact opposite, which in a sense sounds like a rebellion against Hashem. Now that we understand where Rashi is coming from, that the meraglim are ramping up their scare tactics over here by telling us it's not just physical giants, but they are these mega spiritual beings of destruction and devastation. Now you can understand where Rashi goes with the rest of his commentary on the pasuk. That we appeared in our own eyes like grasshoppers, and so in theirs as well. So on those words, that in their eyes we appeared as grasshoppers, is Rashi explains, how did they know this? They said, we heard them talking, and they said, they were saying to each other, look at that, in the vineyards, there are these ants that look like humans. And then the next thing Rashi explains, he takes the word Anak, which is a giant, and he says they're so tall that they like overshadow the sun, or they block the sun. Isn't it moving? That doesn't seem to make sense. Why does Rashi have to explain a giant? We know what a giant is. We've had it before. Second of all, if Rashi does have to explain what it is, why didn't he explain it earlier when the same meraglim in the original report spoke about giants? Explain then what Anokim are. Gimel, thirdly, why does Rashi only explain what a giant is after he explains that we saw ourselves, or the meraglim say they saw themselves, as grasshoppers? It's not the order in which it appears in the pasuk. The pasuk says that they were children of giants, and therefore we saw ourselves as grasshoppers. Why does he switch it around? The explanation is because this is a different kind of a giant. People talking about regular giants, super tall people. A giant's going to look at you and say, shorty. It's not going to say, you're an ant or a grasshopper. The difference in height between a giant, a 7-footer, and a regular person is nowhere near the difference between a human and an animal, and an ant, or for that matter, a grasshopper. Therefore, Rashi has to first say, you want to know what kind of giants they are? When they were talking about us, they saw us tiny as ants. If that's the case, they can't be regular giants like previously Yelidei or Anak. These have to be giants who are so tall that they block the sun. And that really fits in with the distinction that we made between the two psukim, the earlier report, which was just to say there's terribly scary people, they're powerful people there, and this pasuk, which is saying not just people. Originally, when they said we saw giants, someone's like, mate, stammer knocking them meant giants. But here we're talking about the descendants of angels who fell from heaven. They have the power to overshadow or block the sun. That's why we look and feel like grasshoppers. And overshadowing the sun might not even just be a matter of physical, might imply their spiritual power as well. So what's the deeper message? Rashi's pointed out that in this piece, the meraglim are adding that they encountered spiritual beings who fell out of the heavens. Is matim zum teichen atayna from the meraglim via svet mavurim pnimis satira fits exactly with what the overarching issue that the meraglim raised was, as explained in Chassidus, and we know this. Everybody knows how the Alter Rebbe explains the misconduct of the meraglim as a svara needs a vel and arayin in Eretz Yisrael. The whole argument why it's not a good idea to enter Eretz Yisrael is Bashanan in them relied on the fact was having givol bleiben in midbar al dort is menoizgiton von tidus binyan hapanasa. They wanted to stay in the desert because then you are completely immune to any of the stress and anxiety associated with earning a living. And generally, you're excused from all the issues of physicality. And what's great about that, is that way you can be completely invested in spiritual development. But you're going to go into Israel, which is a settled physical land. That's a place where you're going to have to work your field for 6 out of 7 years. It's going to rip you away from your spiritual development. They did not want that. Why did they make such a mistake? Because they had a preconception which was wrong. That the physical and the spiritual must always contradict and be at loggerheads. It's not possible to engage the physical world and simultaneously be invested in spirituality. Cannot happen. Choose your side. That's why they said that this is a land that swallows its inhabitants, meaning that means if you're going to invest, you're going to settle into the things of the physical world, it's going to eat you alive. You're going to be completely immersed in physical things. You won't be able to come up with spiritual air. So that's their overarching perspective. In that context, you can understand why they said, and we saw the fallen angels there. Who were the Nephilim? The descendants of Malachim that fell from the heaven at the time of Enosh. Chazal explained they weren't bad Malachim. They had a kavanah l'shem shamayim to engage in the experience of Torah and mitzvahs. But once they were in this world, exposed to the hedonism of this world, to the materialism of this world, they couldn't withhold it. They couldn't control themselves, and they got sucked in. Despite their tremendous greatness when they were in Shamayim, when they entered this lowly world, not only could they not retain their original spiritual status, to the contrary, they fell completely from their spiritual state. The meraglim said if that happened to them, the same thing is going to happen to us. They say, look, right now you're at a tremendously high level because you're in the midbar, surrounded by all of these things that keep you focused. And you're up, you're completely removed from physicality like angels. But go into Eretz Yisrael, start working the land, start doing physical things. That's it. It's going to drag you down. So Yeshua and Kalev answered them, if the Eibishter wants us, he's going to bring us to the land. And then don't be afraid of the people. They're like our bread. The Eibishter is with us. Yes, of course. Malachim, if they enter this space, it's going to burn them. It's going to drag them down. That's what happened to these Bnei HaNefilim. But we're not Malachim, we're Jews. And a Jew is somebody that the Eibishter wants. The is in the Eden und in der Avodah Lamata. The Eibishter's entire focus, motivation, and joy and pleasure comes from Jews in the physical world doing his mitzvahs. And therefore Jews have exponentially greater resources than Malachim have. The neshama for a start, our neshama is literally a piece of Hashem. We and the Eibishter are one. And therefore we are empowered with the Eibishter's koyach to bring and harmonize and synthesize two opposites, Gashmis, the physical and the spiritual together, by finding the spirit within the physical and allowing the spirit to overtake the materialism of the physical. Therefore, a Jewish person can achieve something not only to remain attached to spirituality while in the physical world, but can achieve even greater. We have the capacity to work through and transform the physicality of the world to become the Eibishter's home. Malach can't do that. That's why Yeshua and Kalev said, if the Eibishter wants us, he'll take us into the land and we'll succeed. As wir bald chofetz bon Hashem, haben ihr nicht was mehr zu haben von Amoritz und noch malach meinohem. Because they bestowed once us and once our avoider, we have nothing to fear of those in the inhabitants of the land. And in fact, they're our bread, meaning not only will the land not swallow us, but to the contrary, we'll swallow them. That means that we will take the land and the inhabitants of the land and we'll absorb them, we'll transform them, we'll refine them. We'll be able to become in control of and to transform the land itself, to turn the world, the Gashmis, into Hashem's home, which in Hashem we will conclude rapidly and be able to see Mashiach immediately.